The wind scraped along the platform like a warning. Clara Metzger clutched her worn leather travel case knuckles white through her gloves and stared down the length of the train. Its iron body shimmered in the brutal Texas sun, huffing clouds of steam that disappeared as quickly as the last of her resolve. She didn't cry. She hadn't allowed herself to not when the school board handed her a folded letter that said her contract wouldn't be renewed, not when Elena Gutierrez turned from the laundry window without a word, not even when her last silver coin jingled alone in her reticule. But now as the whistle screamed once, then twice, Clara blinked hard against the heat and shame behind her eyes. 3 months ago, she had arrived in Fort Davis believing she'd carve a life from the frontier. She'd stood in front of a room full of squirming, sunburnt children and taught them arithmetic and poetry in equal measure. She had insisted the girls stand shoulder to shoulder with the boys. She'd read Whitman beneath the cottonwoods outside the schoolhouse and spoke about stars and steam engines and futures that stretched beyond marriage and dishwater. And for that, she had been quietly but decisively told to go. Now everything that had felt like a beginning suddenly felt like a mistake, and the train that would take her back to San Antonio waited like a judge behind the gallows. All aboard for Alpine, Kerrville, and San Antone, the conductor bellowed, walking along the dusty edge of the platform. Final call. Clara exhaled slowly, adjusted her hat, and stepped toward the car, the clink of her boots swallowed in the low growl of the engine. A woman in a faded shawl herded 2 children up the steps ahead of her. Clara watched the little boy's hand slip into his mother's skirt fold. Her chest tightened. That should have been her building futures, not retreating from them. Her boot touched the metal step. She grabbed the brass rail with a shaking hand. "Miss Metzger. Please. Wait." She froze. The voice was deep, worn with dust and edged with urgency, a kind of respectful desperation. Clara turned her head slowly, heart pounding as though it feared the man more than the train. He stood a few feet behind her hat in hand boots caked in reddish trail dust, his vest open over a faded blue shirt. His face was darker from sun than most men in town, carved strong like the land itself, and his eyes, quiet gray like the inside of a storm, met hers with something that looked like hope. "Mr. Rojas," she said, stunned. She had seen him in town, always alone, always courteous. He nodded to her once outside the general store, tipped his hat near the chapel, but never spoke beyond that. He was not like the others who stared too long or made jokes at her expense. He had always remained distant. Until now. "You're leavin'," he said, his voice softer now, almost hoarse. "Yes," Clara replied, though it came out thinner than she intended. "You don't have to." He took a single step forward, the hat still wrung between his fingers. "Not yet. Not without hearing me out." She blinked. "Mr. Rojas, I don't believe this is an appropriate time." "No, ma'am, it ain't," he interrupted gently. "But I've waited too long already, and I figure the moment you get on that train, I'll regret it the rest of my life." Clara looked past him. The station platform had emptied. Only a few men lingered by the post office, pretending not to watch. The conductor glanced over with narrowed eyes. "I have nowhere to stay," she said, voice steady, now brittle with restraint. "No position, no standing. The town saw to that. I know Elias Rojas said, and it's wrong. But I'm not the town, Miss Metzger. I got a place up north of here 10 miles past the pass. A ranch. I've been building it with my own hands for 3 years now, and I've been trying to speak to you for months. Just never found the right moment." Her hand still gripped the rail, the heat of it burning her glove. She could smell smoke oil and the slow ache of departure behind her. What exactly are you suggesting? She asked, tone sharper now, less from suspicion than from the tremble rising in her chest. I'm asking for a chance, he said. A proper one. Let me court you respectfully. I'll put you up at Mrs. Gutierrez's boarding house. I'll pay the first month myself, and if after that you still want to leave, I'll buy you a new ticket and drive you back here myself. No questions. But I couldn't let you leave without asking. Please, Miss Metzger. She stared at him. This man who barely spoke had just offered her a room a chance and the dignity to walk away later if she chose. Her father would call it madness. Her mother would call it ruin. Her heart called it something else entirely. Behind her, the train hissed. The conductor raised his hand toward the lever. Clara stepped down. The clatter of her case on the platform made a few heads turn. Elias's shoulders eased just a little. He didn't smile, but she saw the relief flicker through him like breath returning. You understand what you've just interrupted? She said, voice tight. I do. You've cost me the last train home, she added. Only if you still believe San Antonio is home. Clara stared at him a long moment. Then take me to Mrs. Gutierrez's. I expect my own room, my own key, and no presumption. Yes, ma'am. He bent, picked up her case with one hand, and gestured toward the street where his buckboard waited in the shade. As they walked, the murmurs followed. So did the questions clawing at Clara's mind. Was she reckless, foolish, desperate, all of them? She dared a glance sideways. Elias walked beside her, his pace respectful, his expression unreadable. But the way he carried her case, the way he didn't fill the silence with useless words, gave her a strange kind of calm. She was not in control. Not yet. But she wasn't being swept away either. As they turned down the narrow lane toward the boarding house, Clara felt the air shift, not just from the train's departure, but from something inside her loosening. She was no longer leaving, but she had no idea what she was stepping into. The parlor at Mrs. Gutierrez's boarding house smelled of lemon oil and old lace. The floor creaked beneath Clara's boots as she stepped inside, the air thick with the memory of afternoon heat and gossip. The town hadn't welcomed her when she arrived, and it certainly hadn't forgotten her now. But at least the walls here didn't whisper behind her back. You want your own key? Mrs. Gutierrez asked, wiping her hands on her apron, brows raised in that way that said she already knew the story, maybe even helped write part of it. I do, Clara said, and I'll pay weekly if that's acceptable. Mrs. Gutierrez's gaze flicked past her shoulder to where Elias waited outside, hat in hand again, like he didn't quite know what to do with himself. He already settled the first month, she said, then fixed Clara with a look both wary and maternal. You sure about this? No, Clara answered truthfully. But I'm not ready to run either. That earned her the barest nod. The woman handed her the iron key and pointed toward the stairs. Second door on the right. It locks from the inside, too. You tell me if anything feels off. Clara climbed the stairs with her case banging lightly against her skirts, her body still stiff from the train she hadn't taken, and the silence that followed her ever since. The room was modest, a narrow bed, a washstand, a single window that opened out toward the hills. But it was hers. Her name was on the ledger downstairs, not as a guest of charity, but as a woman who chose to stay. She stood by the window, brushing back the curtain with one hand, and saw Elias still outside, leaning lightly against the buckboard wheel. He looked up, caught her gaze, and tipped his hat before walking off without another word. Don't ask for more than they offer, her mother once told her, but know when to accept it. The trouble was, Clara didn't know which this was yet. That evening she walked to the post office. The dirt road kicked up in little clouds around her heels. Heads turned. She kept walking. The clerk behind the window looked at her with the same vague contempt as always, as if educated women were a foreign language he refused to learn. No letters, he said, before she opened her mouth. I didn't ask, she replied, turning on her heel. Back at the boarding house, dinner was a quiet affair. Mrs. Gutierrez didn't serve meals, but she'd made fresh tortillas and set aside some beans with chili and rice for Clara. It wasn't kindness so much as duty, but it warmed her belly all the same. She ate alone at the small table in the corner, while voices drifted from the other room, mostly men, laughing, low, talking, a bottle uncorked. She was scraping the last of the beans when the front door creaked, and Elias stepped inside. He nodded to Mrs. Gutierrez, then looked at Clara. May I have a word? She glanced toward the window. The sun had dipped behind the ridge, but the sky still burned gold and red, and the shadows hadn't fully claimed the porch. Outside, she said, in the light. They stood on the porch, and for a moment neither spoke. Elias studied the horizon like it offered answers to things he didn't know how to phrase. I wanted to thank you, he said at last, for staying. I know it couldn't have been easy. I'm still deciding if it was wise, she replied. His mouth twitched, maybe a smile, maybe not. That's fair. Clara crossed her arms. You said you wanted to court me. That's not a word men throw around lightly in towns like this. I ain't most men, he said, and she could hear how true it was. I don't need rescuing, Mr. Rojas. I know. I don't want to be someone's second attempt at a wife or someone you pity. I don't pity you, Clara, he said, and the way he said her name made her stomach flip. I admire you. Always have. She didn't know what to say to that, so she said nothing. I'd like you to visit the ranch, he said. Not today, not even this week, but when you're ready. I want you to see where I live. Meet my sister, meet the land. You have family, just Sophia. She's younger. Keeps me in line. She'll be suspicious of you. That's comforting. He chuckled. You'll like her. And you should know who I am when I'm not standing on a platform. Clara looked out across the yard. The stars were just starting to prick the sky, faint but determined. I'll think about it. That's all I'm asking. He tipped his hat again and started to leave. Mr. Rojas, she called softly. He paused, turned. Why me? He looked down for a second, then raised his eyes again, and they were clearer now, even in the dim light. Because you stayed. That night, Clara couldn't sleep. The room was too quiet, the walls too thin, the town too loud in memory. She sat up, wrapped herself in her shawl, and opened the window. A coyote howled somewhere out in the distance. Wind stirred through the cottonwoods. She didn't want to leave anymore, but she didn't know how to stay either. The next morning, a note arrived, tucked under her door in unfamiliar handwriting. Come see the land when you're ready. Bring boots. We'll ride slow. E. She read it 3 times, folded it into the pocket of her skirt, and set the kettle to boil. By noon, she was standing in the yard, hands in her pockets, watching dust rise on the horizon. Elias's wagon was coming into view, and she hadn't even realized she'd been waiting for it. The wind tugged at the edge of Clara's shawl as she rode beside Elias on the narrow trail leading into the hill country. The buckboard creaked beneath them, the mule steady despite the uneven path. Morning sun filtered through the cottonwoods, dappling the trail with light and shadow. She hadn't said much since they left town, and neither had he. It was a silence she didn't mind. A quiet that didn't press. You always ride in silence, she asked finally, her voice barely louder than the wind. I only talk when I've got something worth saying, he replied, glancing at her with a grin that was more in his eyes than his mouth. Clara looked ahead again. The town had vanished behind them, and the land stretched wide and open, untamed. Seems like the land talks plenty out here. Elias nodded. It does. But most folks never stop to listen. The trail curved, and suddenly the trees gave way to open pasture. A long wooden fence bordered the road, and beyond it, the land rolled gently toward a low ridge. In the distance, a modest ranch house stood beneath a stand of tall pines, smoke curling up from its chimney. A barn to the right, a corral to the left, and scattered cattle grazing under the wide Nevada sky. Home, Elias said softly. The sight made something catch in Clara's chest. It's peaceful. He pulled the wagon up near the front porch. A woman stepped out before the mule had even stopped, dark hair pinned back. Sleeves rolled to her elbows, a rifle slung casually over one shoulder. Her eyes landed on Clara, first assessing not unkind, but not soft either. Sophia Elias said as he climbed down, "This is Clara Moore." Clara stepped down, brushing dust from her skirt. She extended her hand. "Pleasure to meet you." Sophia studied her a beat longer, then shook. "We'll see if that's true." "I warned you," Elias muttered under his breath. Sophia raised an eyebrow. "You bring a woman here without telling me you'd better be ready for questions." "I didn't bring her. She came." "I can leave," Clara said calmly. "You're here now. Might as well have coffee first," Sophia replied, stepping back into the house. "If you can handle bitter." Inside the house was tidy but lived in. Books on a shelf, a rocking chair by the hearth, woven blankets folded neatly on a bench. A map of the territory pinned to one wall marked in charcoal strokes. The kitchen smelled of strong coffee and fresh bread. Clara took a seat at the long table. Elias poured the coffee. Sophia leaned against the counter watching. "You're the teacher from back east," she said. "The one who got run off." Clara nodded. "That's me." "Why'd you come back? I never really left." "That's not an answer. It's the only one I have right now." Sophia sipped her coffee, never breaking eye contact. "You think life out here is some kind of redemption story? I think it's hard. And honest. That's more than I can say for Boston." "Good," Sophia said, setting her cup down. "Because we don't need someone here looking to be rescued. I'm not." Their eyes locked for another long moment. Then Sophia gave a tight nod. "Then you're welcome. For now." Elias looked between them, surprised. "That's it," Sophia smirked. "You thought I'd shoot her." He scratched his neck. "Maybe." They spent the afternoon walking the ranch. Clara met the ranch hands, a mix of weathered men and a younger boy named Thomas, who seemed to idolize Elias. He showed her the barn, the tack room, and the modest vegetable garden out back. Everywhere they went, people greeted Elias with quiet respect, and everywhere Clara walked, she felt the stirrings of something she hadn't known she missed belonging. When they reached the northern fence line, they stopped beneath a sycamore. From there, the valley stretched endlessly, kissed by sun and shadow. "My father planted this tree," Elias said. "Said it was the only thing that gave him shade when he proposed to my mother." Clara traced a finger along the bark. "Did she say yes because of the shade?" "No. She said yes because he stayed." She looked at him. "Like you did at the station, Hankley, like that." For a moment the world was still. No birds, no wind, just the soft hush of breath and the stretch of silence that said everything words couldn't. Then a gunshot cracked in the distance. Elias stiffened. "Stay here." But Clara was already moving beside him as he ran toward the corral. When they arrived, a commotion had broken out. One of the older ranch hands, Whit, was holding a broken rifle and cursing under his breath. A calf had broken through the fence and now limped in the tall grass nearby, bleeding. "That fool Tanner's boy took a shot from the ridge," Whit growled. said he was hunting rabbits. Elias's jaw clenched. He's got no business aiming near our stock. Clara's hands trembled as she watched the calf try to stand. He needs a vet. We don't have one nearby, Elias muttered, but Sophia's patched worse. Sophia was already kneeling beside the calf when they got there, her hands steady, her face tight with focus. Get the sled. We'll haul him in. Clara knelt beside her. Tell me what to do. Sophia glanced over, surprised, then nodded. You hold him here. Keep him calm. You're warm. He'll feel that. Clara pressed her hands gently to the calf's flank. The little body trembled beneath her fingers, but the frantic breathing slowed just a little. When they finally had him back in the barn and bandaged, night had fallen. Elias poured water for everyone and handed Clara a tin cup. You didn't have to help. Yes, I did. He leaned against the stall beside her. You fit here, you know. She didn't answer right away. She looked around the barn, the dim light, the scent of hay and blood and smoke, the steady rhythm of animals breathing in the night. I don't know if I fit, she said, but I want to. And it wasn't until the words left her mouth that she realized how true they were. Outside, the wind picked up again, brushing past the eaves of the barn like a promise not yet fulfilled. Clara stepped out into the night, the key to her boarding room still in her pocket, and looked up at the stars. She wasn't sure what came next, but she wasn't afraid to find out. She didn't need a knight, just someone who saw her worth before the world ever did. Clara rose before dawn, the sky still indigo and hushed. The house creaked around her, like it too was deciding whether to wake. She wrapped the quilt tight around her shoulders and stepped onto the porch. The cold bit her skin, but she welcomed it. It was real sharp and bracing like truth. Across the field, faint light glimmered at the barn, Elias already up, already working. She found herself walking toward that glow before her feet even made the decision. Inside, he was throwing feed into troughs, sleeves rolled, shirt damp with early sweat. He didn't look up right away. You don't sleep? She asked, voice low in the straw-laced air. He paused, a half-smile tugging at his face. I sleep fine. Just not long. She leaned on the stall gate, watching him move, easy, practiced, every motion purposeful. I'd like to earn my keep. You already helped with that calf. That was instinct, she said. This is different. I want a job. Elias walked over, pulling off his gloves. I won't have you lifting feed sacks. Your ribs are still bruised. I'm not asking to rope cattle, Clara said, but there's work I can do. I can read and write better than anyone for 50 miles, I wager. And if you're serious about expanding the ranch, you'll need records, letters, accounts, all written proper. He studied her head, tilted. You offering to be my bookkeeper? I'm offering to make myself useful. He didn't answer at first. Then slowly he nodded. You've got a room in the back of the house near the study. Used to be where my mother kept her ledgers. Then it settled. Before he could say anything else, she turned and left the barn, the cold morning air swirling around her, but the knot in her chest unwinding just a little. Sophia met her in the kitchen an hour later. You mean to work here like one of us? I'm not one to sit idle, Clara replied, tying her apron. You don't strike me as idle, Sophia said, handing her a cup of chicory. Clara accepted it, sipping cautiously. I was once. Let life decide for me. Not anymore. Good, Sophia said with a small smile. Then you'll be fine. The rest of the day passed in small but satisfying motions. Clara cataloged the dusty ledgers, drafted a supply letter for the blacksmith, and rewrote a purchase agreement with neater figures. By late afternoon, her fingers were ink-stained, but her mind buzzed in a way it hadn't in years. For the first time since leaving Boston, her knowledge felt like a strength, instead of a burden. She stepped outside to stretch her legs just as the mail rider trotted up the trail. The young man tipped his hat, handed over a small pouch of letters, and was gone again in a plume of dust. She flipped through the bundle. Two were addressed to Elias. One, surprisingly, was addressed to her. Clara Moore, care of Elias Roan, Roan Ranch, Calico Ridge, Nevada, no return address. The handwriting was careful, feminine. Her stomach twisted. Inside the envelope was a single sheet of paper. Clara, word reached us of your troubles out west. I cannot say I'm surprised, only saddened that you've chosen this path. I hope one day you realize the value of quiet dignity and return to the expectations placed upon you by your upbringing. Mother. She read it 3 times before folding it carefully and tucking it back into the envelope. Her hands shook. Not from pain, but from the dull throb of being reminded she had been measured and dismissed by the people who were supposed to know her best. She didn't realize Elias had walked up behind her until he cleared his throat gently. Bad news. She shook her head. Just old news. Still stings. Elias leaned against the porch rail beside her. My father once told me that a man's name means nothing if the people saying it don't know who he really is. Clara looked at him. Your father was wise. He smiled faintly, or stubborn. Couldn't always tell. Clara hesitated, then handed him his letters. 2 for you. One looked like legal stuff. He took them, nodded his thanks, and opened one with a practiced tear. As he scanned the contents, his brow tightened. What is it? She asked. The river rights, he said slowly. They've been challenged. Challenged by who? Probably by folks connected to the Tanner family. They've been eyeing the valley for years, claiming we're diverting more water than our fair share. Clara stiffened. Is it true? No. But truth don't always matter when money's involved. She stepped closer. Then we'll prove it. You have maps, usage records, old agreements. He glanced at her. I told you I'm useful. That night she stayed up late in the study, poring over old contracts, reading land surveys until the words blurred. Sophia brought her a blanket and tea without a word, and Tomas peeked in just to smile before disappearing again. Outside, coyotes howled in the distance, but inside it was quiet, safe. 2 days later, Clara stood at the edge of the Roan land, with Elias and Sophia overlooking the northern creek. A wagon had been spotted, riders from the Tanner ranch surveying with their own equipment. Elias hadn't said much, but the tension in his shoulders spoke volumes. Don't go talking to them, Sophia warned. They're looking for a reason to stir things. Clara folded her arms. And what do we do instead? Let them take the land by inches. Elias touched her elbow. Not today. Let me handle it. She watched him ride down toward the other men, the line of his back straight, voice calm but firm. She'd seen that kind of quiet strength before, but never in someone who used it to protect, not control. When he returned, his jaw was tight. They'll be back with lawyers, he said. Clara took a breath. Then let them come. We'll be ready. He studied her, something shifting in his eyes. You're not just passing through, are you? She shook her head. I don't think I ever was. That evening, while the others turned in, Clara lingered on the porch, looking out across the land as stars filled the sky like spilled salt. Her mother's words still sat in her coat pocket, but their weight had lessened. Because here, under this open sky, she was no one's disgrace. She was Clara Moore, capable, wanted, and seen. Inside, Elias lit a lamp and set it by the window. A silent signal in the dark. A welcome that didn't need words. She stepped inside. He didn't need her to fix him, just to stay when it got ugly. The next morning, Clara found Elias already saddled and ready by the corral, his expression drawn tight like a rope fraying at the ends. The mail had come early, and with it confirmation the Tanners had filed formal claim with the county court, challenging the Roan Ranch's water rights. Elias said nothing at first, just handed her the paper and watched her face as she read. "They want a hearing in Reno," she said after a long moment. "They think you won't show." "I'll show," Elias replied. "But what I won't do is leave the ranch unguarded." Clara looked up sharply. "You think they'll try something while you're gone?" Elias rubbed the back of his neck. Tanners known for pushing while backs are turned, and with the grazing rights and water tied together, this could be more than paperwork. They want to squeeze us dry before the first real thaw. Sophia stepped up behind them, dusting off her sleeves. "They want us rattled. It's a test. You go to Reno, I hold the line here." "I'll go with you," Clara said, heart-thudding. Elias shook his head. "It's not your fight." "Yes, it is," she said. "You said so yourself. I'm not passing through. Let me help." He held her gaze, something vulnerable flickering there, but he nodded. "All right. We ride at dawn." The journey to Reno was a long, bone-rattling ride in the old wagon. They passed canyons scorched gold by the sun and shadowed by red cliffs. Silence stretching between them, but never tense. Clara rode with the legal documents clutched tightly to her chest, her eyes scanning the land for movement even when they rested. On the second day, just outside Virginia City, they camped under the stars, the fire between them flickering low. Elias stared into the flames for a long while before speaking. "My mother used to sit right where you're sitting," he murmured. "Same fire circle, same sky. She'd hum old songs, ones I never learned the words to." Clara sat cross-legged, her chin resting on her knees. "You miss her every time I breathe." She nodded. "I miss someone too. My sister. She died young. Nobody ever really talked about her after. Like grief was a shame." He met her eyes then. "There's no shame in what hurts." She reached out not to touch, but to let her fingers rest near his, on the blanket between them. Not quite a gesture of affection, more like solidarity. "I don't know how to fix this for you," she whispered. "I don't need you to fix it," he said. "Just don't leave." "I'm not leaving." That night, neither of them slept much, but they didn't need to. They just listened to the wind curl over the rocks, the brush crackling in the fire, and the slow, steady rhythm of breath shared beneath an open sky. By the time they reached Reno, the courthouse loomed like a monument to things men fought over land power names. Elias stood tall in his dust-worn clothes, while Clara wore the only dress she'd packed her hair braided tightly back. They walked in together side by side like they belonged there. The courtroom was cold, stark, smelling of ink and old wood. The Tanners sat on the other bench, smug and freshly shaven. Their lawyer, a slick man with a pinched nose, looked Clara up and down with barely masked contempt. "Mr. Roan, the judge," said, voice flat. "You've come to respond." Elias stood. "Yes, Your Honor. And I've brought our ledgers, surveys, and usage records for the last 12 seasons." The judge motioned for Clara. "You're the one who prepared these?" "Yes, sir. Clara Moore, former teacher from Massachusetts. I helped organize and verify the records." There was a whisper in the room at the mention of her origins, but Clara didn't flinch. She stood straight, voice calm, her hands never trembling once. The lawyer for the Tanners rose. "We'd like to challenge the admissibility of her records. She's not a licensed clerk or land assessor." "She's literate," Elias said flatly, "and honest. Which is more than I can say for the men sitting across from us." The judge banged the gavel. "Enough. We'll review the documentation." They spent the next 2 hours presenting evidence maps, rainfall charts, dated receipts for hired ditch diggers, cattle movement logs. Clara had anticipated every question, every angle. She had organized the truth so tightly, it left no room for wriggling. When they stepped outside after the hearing, Elias let out a breath he'd been holding since they arrived. "You saved us in there," he said. She shook her head. "No. Your work did. I just gave it a voice. No one's ever done that for me." Clara looked up at him, her voice soft. "You didn't need a knight, Elias. Just someone to stand beside you when it got ugly." He didn't speak, just reached out and brushed a strand of hair from her cheek, rough fingers trembling for just a second. Then he turned, motioning toward the horses. "We should ride. Weather's turning." On the way back, the clouds rolled in heavy and low, and by the time they reached the halfway mark, snow had begun to fall, not thick, but enough to steal warmth from their bones. They made shelter at an abandoned line shack near the old Silver Ridge, a one-room place with a broken stove and a cot that leaned like it had given up. Elias worked to fix the stove, while Clara gathered what dry wood she could find. When the fire finally sparked, they sat wrapped in blankets, close because of the cold, but something more layered between them. "I used to think needing someone was weakness," Clara said, voice quiet. "So did I. But maybe it's not. Maybe it's how we know we're still alive," he replied. The wind howled outside, but in the little shack the fire held, stronger than it should have, like something unseen was protecting them or rewarding them for staying, for not walking away when it got hard. Clara leaned her head against his shoulder just for a moment. She didn't speak, didn't need to. And neither did he. When she walked into the barn with mud on her hem and fire in her voice, Elias knew the quiet days were over. By the time they returned to the ranch, the snow had melted into thick slush, leaving the trails a mess of ruts and churned-up earth. Mud clung to the wagon wheels and the horses' legs like a burden that didn't want letting go. Clara stepped down skirts already soaked and stained and barely waited for Elias to unhitch the team before marching toward the barn. She passed Whit without a word, nodded at Tomas, who stood holding a rope line, and pushed through the barn doors like a woman who had no time for pleasantries. Sophia looked up from mending a saddle and blinked. "You're back early." Clara tossed her bag to the side and paced, voice sharp. "I need every map, every record, everything we have on the northern slope." Sophia raised an eyebrow. "You want to tell me why, or should I start guessing?" Elias entered, then his coat slung over one shoulder, eyes drawn to the tension radiating off Clara. "What happened?" Clara spun to face him. Tanner filed another motion. "He's petitioning to cut our grazing area by 1/3. If he gets it, you lose control of the slope. Every cow you run up there becomes trespass." Elias's mouth tightened. "It's a bluff." "No," Clara said. "It's bait. He's hoping you'll fight it with fists instead of facts. He wants a brawl he can take to the sheriff." Sophia stood hands on hips. "So what do? We counter with a land usage claim based on legacy rights. Your father grazed those herds up there for 2 decades, correct?" Elias nodded slowly. "Every summer. That was his ground. Then we're going to make it official. But we'll need statements, and dates, and proof." Whit, who had come in quietly, cleared his throat. "I've been here since your daddy ran those herds. I'll sign whatever I need to." Clara turned to him. "That would help." Sophia stepped forward. "You sure about this? Once you push back, there's no more peace." "There's no peace now," Clara said. "There's only delay. We can either stand our ground or keep giving it up one fence post at a time." Elias watched her, something unreadable in his face. He didn't say anything, just nodded once firmly. The next days passed in a blur of ink memory and weathered testimony. Clara set up shop at the kitchen table, surrounded by maps with cracked folds and journals written in faded pencil. She interviewed every ranch hand who'd worked through the last decade, cross-referenced their stories with payment records and winter feed orders. Sophia brought her stew in the evenings sometimes with a silent nod, other times with quiet encouragement. Elias stayed busy reinforcing fence lines and inspecting the slope personally. One afternoon, Clara found him on horseback by the creek, staring down at where the water had receded. "I never noticed before," she said, joining him. "But this land listens to you." He glanced at her. "It listens to whoever pays attention." They rode side by side after that, saying little but sharing something steadier than speech. By the time they returned, Clara had dirt on her hem and wind in her cheeks, and Elias looked at her like he finally saw all of her. Not just the teacher or the woman who'd nearly left, but the one who stayed despite everything. That night, a wagon arrived under cover of dusk. Clara was the one who heard it first. The faint creak of wood, a muttered curse. She stepped out, shotgun in hand, the way Sophia had shown her. Two men stood at the gate. One she didn't know. The other was the tanner boy Nathan, no longer a boy now, but a smug man with city-polished boots. "Evening, Miss Moore." Nathan called out. "I'd like a word. You can write a letter like everyone else." He chuckled. "I thought you might say that, but I figured it'd be polite to deliver our latest offer in person." Clara stepped off the porch, boots crunching over gravel. Offer Nathan reached into his coat and pulled out a folded document. "We'll drop the slope petition. All you have to do is stop the Roans from claiming the southern pasture near town." Elias appeared then, coat open, rifle in hand, but lowered. "Get off my land, Nathan." "This isn't about you," Roan Nathan said. "It's about business. Your lady friend's smart, let her make the smart call." Clara took the paper, read it slowly, then looked up. "You want us to betray every rancher on this side of the ridge for 30 acres of dust and snakes?" Nathan smirked. "That dust's gonna have a railway in a year." Elias stepped forward. "You heard her. Leave." Nathan's smile faded. "You'll regret this." "I already do," Clara replied. "Every second I spent thinking men like you could be reasoned with." The wagon rolled off wheels, spitting dirt behind them. Later, Elias sat on the porch steps, polishing his rifle. Clara joined him, hands wrapped around a mug of warm cider. "You didn't have to step out there," he said. "I did." "Why? Because when I walked into that barn with mud on my hem and fire in my voice," she said quietly, "I realized something." He looked up at her, waiting. "I don't want to protect this land because it's yours. I want to protect it because it's mine too. Or at least it could be." He set the rifle aside and reached for her hand. "It already is." She leaned against him, cider forgotten, watching the stars begin to climb. Tomorrow would bring more letters, more claims, more battle. But tonight was theirs. The storm didn't break them, it revealed who was still standing when the dust cleared. The wind hit like a train in the middle of the night. It roared down from the mountain like it had a vendetta, rattling windows and groaning through the eaves. The old barn door flapped so hard, Clara thought it might tear clean off its hinges. She was already up and throwing on her coat before Elias reached the front room. "Sophia's still at the bunkhouse," he muttered, slipping his arms into his vest. "Thomas, too." "I'll get the lantern," Clara said, tightening the scarf around her neck. "You get the ropes." By the time they made it to the porch, the dust was swirling in angry circles, thick and dry and mean. The air smelled of cracked earth and cold metal. Thunder rumbled, though no rain came, just the brittle scent of something broken and waiting to snap. Elias took the lead, cutting through the wind toward the bunkhouse, his figure disappearing into the grit. Clara headed for the barn, one hand shielding her face, the other clutching the lantern. She got inside just in time to see the calves crowding the corner, frightened and stamping, while the old mule bellowed in distress. She worked fast, latching doors, calming the animals, checking for loose beams. The storm howled around her like some ancient beast, but her hands didn't shake. Not anymore. This was her ground now, too. Elias burst in, 20 minutes later, eyes bloodshot from dust arms slung around Thomas's shoulders. The boy was coughing hard, wrapped in a damp blanket. Sophia Clara asked, her voice nearly lost to the wind. She stayed with the fence line, Elias said, teeth clenched. Said if that north post goes, the cattle will scatter clear to Black Hollow. I'll go, Clara said, already reaching for her boots. No, Elias said, firm. You stay. I'll bring her back. She grabbed his arm. You'll lose your footing in this. Let me take the west trail, it's lower and out of the wind. He hesitated, jaw set, then nodded once. Take my scarf. She took it and disappeared into the storm without looking back. The west trail was treacherous in daylight. In the storm, it was a test of faith. But Clara moved like someone born on this land. Her boots found purchase between roots and rocks, her breath steady despite the grit in her mouth. She followed the glow of a flickering lantern ahead, just enough light to guide her to the ridge. She spotted Sophia hunched near the post, bracing it with a long beam hair whipping loose from its braid. You're late, Sophia barked as Clara reached her. And you're stubborn, Clara shot back, grabbing the end of the beam. Together now. They fought the wind side by side, shoulder to shoulder, until the last nail was driven deep. Sophia wiped her brow, smearing mud across her temple. You didn't have to come, she said. Clara smiled grimly. Yes, I did. They made it back just before sunrise, clothes soaked through hands, raw hair plastered to their faces. Elias was waiting, worry carved into every line of his face. He didn't say anything when he saw Clara just stepped forward and pulled her into his arms, breath catching like a man who'd been underwater too long. I told you I'd be back, she whispered. I believed you. That's what scared me. Inside the ranch was still intact, barely. The roof over the henhouse had blown clear off, the water barrels were overturned, and the east fence was down. But the cattle were safe, and no one was hurt. The silence after the storm was almost sacred. Sophia brewed strong coffee and passed it around without a word. Tomas slept curled by the hearth, exhausted. Whit patched the roof with Eli from town, who had ridden up when he saw the dust rise. Elias walked the property in the quiet dawn light, Clara beside him. The ranch looked battered, but standing, like them. You remember what you said, he murmured, about protecting this place. Because it might be yours, I meant it. He stopped walking, eyes scanning the sky. I'm not good at promises, or speeches. Then don't make one. But I want you here, he said. Not just for bookkeeping or barn doors or standing through a storm. I want you here because this place is better with you in it. So am I. Clara's throat tightened. You're asking me to stay. I'm asking you to build this place with me, whatever it becomes. She stepped close, the scent of cedar and ash still clinging to his shirt. I'm already building, just hadn't told you yet. He smiled, small and real. Then let's call it a start. The rest of the day passed with the slow rhythm of repairs. Hammering nails, collecting branches, feeding tired horses. The kind of work that soothed the heart even when the muscles ached. Clara didn't stop moving, didn't stop belonging. Every time someone called her name, Thomas asking for help with the feed, Sophia tossing her an apple, it felt like an anchor dropped into place. That night, Elias found her at the back porch, looking out over the slope. The stars were out again, as if nothing had ever threatened them. He handed her a folded slip of paper. From Reno. She opened it carefully. It was a ruling. The land dispute had been denied. The court upheld the Roan family's claim thanks to the legacy testimony maps and detailed records. Her eyes lifted to his. We won. We did, he said. You did. No, she said quietly. We stood, and that made all the difference. He didn't propose with a ring, but with land cleared a table set and a place made for her name. The morning after the storm, the valley held its breath. Frost clung to fence rails like lace, and steam curled from the barns as cattle stirred in the stillness. The ranch was quiet repaired, but changed like a place that had been tested and come through stronger for it. Clara stood in the kitchen, sleeves rolled up, kneading dough with steady hands. The room smelled of yeast and cinnamon, warm and grounding. Thomas sat nearby, slicing apples for a pie, humming something soft. You hum better than you ride, Clara teased gently. I ride better than I clean stalls, he shot back, grinning. Sophia walked in with her ledger, plopped it down, and leaned against the counter. You two sound like an old married couple. Thomas turned red. Clara just laughed. Give it time. But there was a quietness under her smile, something still turning over in her mind. The storm had passed. The fight had quieted, but another kind of question was starting to bloom, slow and stubborn as spring roots under the snow. By late morning, Elias still hadn't come in from the south pasture. Whit had taken the east fence. Thomas was helping the carpenter reattach the henhouse roof. But Elias had been gone longer than usual. Clara pulled on her coat, brushed flour from her apron, and walked out past the stable. The sun was warm now, melting the last of the frost into glistening beads on every leaf. She found him past the far fence near the bend of the stream, where the cottonwoods leaned over the water like tired elders. He was hammering something into the ground stakes and line string, working with slow, thoughtful precision. You building another fence? She called out. He didn't look up. Not exactly. Curious, she stepped closer and saw the shape he was marking out, a rectangle staked neatly into the earth, its dimensions measured and true. Just behind it was a new clearing where brush had been burned away and the ground flattened. He finally stood, wiped sweat from his brow, and looked at her. This is where the new house will go. Clara blinked. New house. He nodded. Been thinking. The old place is fine, but it's my father's house. Always was. This one's for what comes next. Her heart stumbled over itself. And what comes next? She asked. Elias didn't fumble or stammer. He just stepped forward and said it plain the way he said everything. You do. If you want to. She stared at him, lips parted, not from shock, but from the weight of understanding. He continued, voice low. I don't have a ring. I don't have fancy words. But I've cleared the land, and I'll build it board by board with my own hands. There'll be a porch for sitting, a table that seats more than two, and room for whatever life we choose. Clara swallowed, hard, eyes stinging. Are you asking me to marry you, Elias Roan? I'm asking you to share this life with me, however it looks, however long it lasts. She didn't answer with a word. She stepped forward and pressed her forehead to his chest, wrapping her arms around him, and the steadiness of his heartbeat against her cheek said more than vows ever could. He held her in the middle of that staked-out dream where the wind rustled through cottonwoods and the soil still smelled like ash and spring. They spent the rest of the day working side by side. Clara helped measure the slope of the land, marking where the porch would catch morning light. Elias showed her the blueprint he'd sketched in charcoal, rough but thoughtful. A kitchen with windows to the pasture. A reading nook under the stair. A cellar for preserves. As they worked, others began to notice. Tomas rode by with a wagon full of scrap wood and raised a brow. Sophia, when told, merely smiled and said, "It's about time." That evening, the ranch gathered around the long table. Sophia cooked rabbit stew and cornbread. Thomas set the plates with nervous precision, and Whit even wore his clean shirt. Elias stood beside Clara as they ate, his hand resting lightly against her back. When Sophia tapped her glass, all eyes turned. "Well," she said dryly, "I suppose you'll want to make it official before the barn burns down again, or someone challenges the title to the henhouse." Clara laughed, the kind of deep laugh that rose from the ribs. "Soon," she said. "Soon enough." After dinner, she walked outside with Elias beneath the stars. The valley stretched quiet and open, the fence lines gleaming faintly in the moonlight. "I never imagined this," Clara murmured. "Which part? All of it. That I'd leave Boston disgraced and end up standing barefoot on Nevada soil with your hand in mine." He turned toward her, eyes solemn. "You weren't disgraced. You were set free." Clara looked at the house in the distance, the smoke curling gentle from the chimney, the hum of laughter still faint in the night air. She felt the dirt beneath her toes, the promise of the new house drawn on the land, the steadiness of Elias beside her. "You know," she whispered, "I used to wonder if I was too much, too opinionated, too loud, too proud." "You're just enough," he said. "Just right." She nodded, letting those words root deep inside her. The wind tugged at her hair, but it didn't carry her away. Not this time. Not ever again. You can love someone and still carry hurt, but healing means choosing to stay even with the ache. The air carried that faint tang of spring snowmelt, wet sagebrush earth, turning soft again, the whisper of thawed life returning under boots and hooves. Clara had never known land could speak so clearly, or that a home could unfold beneath her hands like something alive. The foundation for the new house had been set. Elias and Whit had spent 2 days leveling the ground, while Thomas helped dig and haul the heavier stones. Clara kept the ledgers and sketched interior layouts by firelight, her handwriting growing steadier with each passing night, her dreams sharper. But the letter came just after breakfast, tucked between supply notices and a rail schedule. Clara recognized the handwriting before she even unfolded the paper. Neat, formal, her mother's again. "Clara, word has reached us that you are building something permanent. I must admit, I didn't believe you would stay. I assumed the wilderness would exhaust your pride eventually. Perhaps it still might. But I beg you to think carefully before wedding yourself to a life so far beneath your station. Your father remains deeply disappointed, though he won't say it aloud. There is still room for return. You may always come back if you leave this foolishness behind. Mother." Clara folded the paper in silence and placed it in the firebox beside the stove. Sophia watched from across the room. "Family, something like it. You want to talk about it?" Clara shook her head. "No, I've done enough talking for them." Instead, she tied her scarf tight and headed out toward the barn. Elias was inside repairing the old saddle tree, his sleeves rolled up and sweat already darkening his collar. "You all right?" he asked as she stepped inside. She hesitated, then nodded. "Yeah, just clearing my head." He leaned on the bench. "More ghosts from back east." Clara gave a tired smile. "They keep showing up like they were invited." Elias didn't press. He simply handed her a tool and pointed to the stirrup straps. "Then let's work. That usually clears mine." So they did side by side, the creak of leather and the scrape of metal louder than any words. As they worked, the rhythm steadied her. Every knot untied, every buckle mended, was like stitching herself back together. That afternoon, Elias handed her a parcel wrapped in cloth. Inside was a dress not fancy, not frilled, but hand-stitched and strong. Dark blue with a modest waist and a hem that wouldn't trip on steps or stirrups. Clara looked up at him, brow lifted. "It's for the wedding," he said simply, "if you still want one." She blinked. "You made this. Sophia helped," he said. "Mostly I just pricked my fingers and said things I can't repeat in a church." Clara laughed full and free. "It's beautiful. Not as beautiful as you in it." She softened. "You sure about this, Elias?" His voice was steady. "I've never been surer of anything." But even as the warmth settled into her chest, the ache remained tucked beneath it like a sliver, small but sharp. The kind only old wounds leave behind. That night, as the moon cast pale silver across the ranch, Clara sat on the edge of the porch with a letter in her lap, one she hadn't sent, but had written again and again in her mind. "Dear Mother, I'm not the same woman who left Boston. I know that must trouble you. But this land, this man, this life, they've given me more than our parlor ever did. I'm not ashamed of the dirt under my nails or the scar on my shoulder or the way my name fits in Elias's mouth, like it was meant to be there all along. I won't be returning. Not because I hate you, but because I've finally stopped trying to earn the kind of love that only comes when I disappear. Yours, Clara." She didn't burn it. Not yet. But she didn't fold it either. Instead, she tucked it inside her journal between the page where she'd drawn the layout for the kitchen windows and the one where she'd sketched the hills behind the barn. Because it was part of the story. Even the parts that hurt. The next morning, while feeding the chickens, Clara noticed a rider coming down the north trail fast. Dust kicked up behind him in thick clouds. It was Eli from town. Elias and Sophia stepped out onto the porch as he pulled up. "Sheriff sent me," Eli panted, swinging down. "There was a break-in at the courthouse. Land records. Someone tried to burn them." Elias tensed. Yours were taken. Sheriff thinks Tanner's behind it." Clara's stomach dropped. "Do they have proof?" "Not yet. But they're working on it. Sheriff needs Elias to come in tomorrow and give a statement." Sophia cursed under her breath. Elias looked at Clara. "They're not done with us." "No," she said, "but neither are we." Later, as they stood beneath the unfinished frame of the new home wind, pushing through the bare studs, Clara reached for his hand. "We'll fight them," she said. "Not with fists, but with every record, every story, every truth we've got." He nodded. "Together." The wind moved through the valley like breath, and they stood in the bones of the house they were building, surrounded by hurt, yes, but still choosing to stay. Even with the ache. Especially with the ache. "They tried to erase our names from the land, but you can't burn down what's already rooted in the soil." Rain started falling as Elias stepped into the sheriff's office, hat, dripping boots slick with the red clay of Calico Ridge. Clara stood beside him, shoulders squared beneath her shawl chin, lifted like a woman who'd weathered worse than this. Behind the desk sat Sheriff Holt, gray-haired, barrel-chested, and carrying the tired look of a man who'd seen too many disputes over lines drawn on dirt. "The file's gone," Holt said, sliding a folder across the desk. "And not just yours. 3 others, old claims, grazing permits, water rights. All tied to land Tanner's been circling." Clara opened the folder, scanned the copy of the incident report. "Any idea who broke in? Someone knew where we kept the real ledgers," Holt said. "Didn't bother the safe, just the cabinet with the originals. Clean work." Elias frowned. "Tanner doesn't get his hands dirty." No, Holt agreed. "But men like him don't need to." Clara tapped her finger against the sheriff's desk. "What do we do now?" "Court needs physical evidence," Holt said. "Or sworn testimony from someone with legal authority. someone who can vouch for the truth of those records before they vanished. I can, Clara said, voice steady. I reviewed those ledgers. I transcribed them. I helped submit them to the court. You're not an official, Holt replied gently. Not in the eyes of the law. Then make me one, she said. The sheriff blinked. You can deputize civilians temporarily, she continued. Appoint me as interim recorder or clerk for this matter. I'll give sworn testimony, provide copies of the ledgers I transcribed, and support it with ranch accounts, bills of sale, fence records, everything we've got. Elias looked at her like she'd grown wings. You really want to stand up there and go toe-to-toe with their lawyer again? I didn't come this far to be erased, she said. Holt studied her eyes, narrowing in thought. Then slowly he nodded. You've got guts, Miss Moore. I'll draft the papers. The appointment was filed by noon. Clara signed the oath with a shaking hand, but a steady heart. When she looked up, Elias was watching her like a man who'd finally seen someone reach the summit of a long, lonely climb. Back at the ranch, Sophia was already reinforcing the ledger room, hammering new locks into the cabinet. If they can't steal your land, they'll come after your words, she muttered. Let them try, Clara said. We've got more than words now. They gathered every copy of Land Usage Ranch Journal's bank statements. Thomas found a crumpled receipt from a salt delivery 3 years back that proved stock was still grazing the disputed land. Witt unearthed a grain order with Elias's father's name on it, another piece of the puzzle showing continuous use. The ranch turned into a war room, papers spread across tables, maps tacked to walls, the smell of coffee and pencil shavings thick in the air. But even as they prepared, the pressure mounted. First came the letter. Tanner's lawyer sent it, formal, clipped, veiled in legal threat. A warning to cease all building until the court hearing concluded. Clara read it aloud, then set it aside. They're trying to rattle us, she said. Is it working? Elias asked. She met his eyes. Not even a little. Then came the messenger, a man in a gray coat, who rode in from town and asked to speak to Elias privately. Clara watched them from the porch as they talked near the stables, the man gesturing too much, Elias standing too still. When he returned, Clara waited. Well, Tanner's offering a settlement, Elias said. He'll drop the suit, stop pushing boundaries if I sell him the slope and agree not to build. Clara went very quiet, and I told him to shove it. She let out a breath, chest tight, with something between pride and dread. You think he'll stop now? No, Elias said. But I think he's scared. Good, she whispered. He should be. The hearing was set for 3 days later. Clara spent the nights rewriting her affidavit, cross-referencing every page, checking every number. She barely slept, but she didn't feel tired. Not in the way she used to. Not in the way Boston had drained her. The night before they were due in court, Elias found her on the porch again. She was holding the blueprint of the new house, fingers smudged with charcoal. You nervous? He asked. Yes, she said honestly. He sat beside her knee, brushing hers. You could still walk away. She looked at him. So could you. Not a chance. She folded the paper and set it down. You know what scares me most, losing no. That even if we win, they'll keep coming. Men like Tanner don't stop. They just change their shape. Elias was quiet a moment. Then we hold our shape too. We grow deeper roots. She turned to him. You think we've got enough? He reached for her hand, rough fingers curling around hers. We've got each other. That's more than enough. In the early light of morning, with frost still clinging to the fences, they loaded the wagon with documents and rode toward town. Thomas waved from the gate. Sophia stood by the new frame of the house, arms crossed, watching them go like a general sending her best soldiers into battle. The courthouse loomed ahead, brick and iron, and solemn silence. Inside, Tanner was already seated with his attorney, smug and polished. But when Clara walked in beside Elias, shoulders squared and chin lifted, something in Tanner's gaze faltered, because she didn't look like the woman who had stepped off the train. She looked like she belonged. The judge called order. The clerk took her oath. Clara stepped forward with her bundle of papers, heart-pounding voice steady. "We're not just defending land," she said. "We're defending memory, and memory doesn't burn." She laid the documents down one by one, names and dates and signatures stacked like bricks in a wall, too strong to shake. And as she spoke, Elias watched with quiet pride, knowing full well they could take papers, they could twist laws, but they couldn't take what had already taken root in the soil, in the people, and in them. The courtroom didn't grant them a victory. Their victory had already been lived breath by breath, nail by nail, sunrise by sunrise. The courthouse walls soaked in tension like wood absorbs rain. The air was still thick with the weight of drawn-out battles and half-spoken truths. Clara sat straight-backed at the plaintiff's table, hands folded tightly in her lap, pulse steady because it had to be. Elias sat beside her, boots planted, one hand on the table, the other resting close enough that if she needed grounding, she only had to reach. Across from them, Tanner lounged with his attorney, all smug posture and tailored arrogance. His boots were polished, his suit was Eastern cut, but there was a flicker in his eyes, just a flicker that suggested the certainty was beginning to waver. The judge cleared his throat. "Miss Moore, you've sworn your affidavit and submitted supporting evidence. You may now deliver your summary." Clara stood, smoothed her skirt, and stepped to the front of the room. The wooden floor beneath her creaked just once, as if warning her to measure her words. "Your Honor," she began, voice calm, "this land dispute isn't about technicalities. It's not about boundary lines drawn in legal ink or handshakes from a generation ago. It's about continuity, about stewardship, about what it means to belong." She held up a ledger page worn at the edges, the ink faded but legible. This record was transcribed from a document that's now missing. But the cattle still grazed those fields. The fences still stood. The people still worked the land. You can't erase that with a fire or a forged motion. A murmur rippled through the onlookers. Local ranchers had gathered quietly in the benches. Neighbors who knew the ridge, knew the roans, knew what would happen if men like Tanner were allowed to rewrite history with coin and bluff. Clara continued. "I didn't grow up on this land. I came from Boston, proper dresses, drawing rooms, and long hallways full of silence. But I found more truth in one muddy morning in Calico Ridge than I ever did under chandeliers." She glanced back at Elias, then at the judge. The Roan Ranch didn't steal water or cheat boundaries. It held its ground. And now we're asking the law to do the same. The judge leaned forward, expression unreadable. "Thank you, Miss Moore." She returned to her seat, every muscle trembling now that the words had been said. Elias leaned over and touched her knee, a silent tether. Tanner's attorney stood next, clearing his throat with exaggerated pomp. "With all due respect, Your Honor, we do not dispute the passion of Miss Moore's testimony. But legal rights are not established through sentiment. They are built on official documents, and those documents have unfortunately been lost." He smiled thinly. "And while Miss Moore is certainly articulate, she is not a registered land officer, nor was she present during the original usage periods she claims to represent." Clara didn't flinch. Neither did Elias, because truth didn't need permission to stand. The judge raised a hand. Enough. He looked between both tables. The room stilled. Even the dust seemed to pause in the shafts of morning light. "I've read every record," the judge said. "I've seen the damage this fire did literally and legally. But I've also seen the consistency in Miss Moore's transcripts, the corroboration from multiple sources, and the patterns that point to a long-standing, unbroken occupation and stewardship of the Rhone lands. He paused, then looked directly at Tanner. You made your move too late, Mr. Tanner. You should have tried to buy not bully. Then he turned to Clara and Elias. The court finds in favor of the Rhone Ranch. Grazing rights remain, water rights stand, and the attempted theft and destruction of records is now under separate investigation. A collective breath left the room. Tanner's lawyer cursed under his breath. Tanner stood too fast and stormed out, boots striking the floor like gunfire. Clara didn't move. Elias rose slowly beside her, only speaking when the judge had left the bench. You did it, he said softly. No, Clara said, standing. We did. As they stepped out into the sunlit street, people began to clap. Not wildly, not like some town parade, but slowly, sincerely. A few neighbors tipped their hats. A widow named June handed Clara a small bouquet of desert marigolds. Thomas came running from the general store, nearly tripping over a barrel in his excitement. We won, he shouted. We did, Clara said, smiling. He hugged her before thinking twice, then turned sheepishly to Elias. Sorry. Elias just grinned. I've had to learn to share her too. They rode back to the ranch, slower than usual, not because they were tired, but because they didn't need to rush anymore. The sun hung low over the ridge, warm and amber and whole, the kind of light that made even the broken things look golden. When they passed the site of the new house, Clara asked him to stop. She stepped off the wagon and walked the perimeter, now marked by beams and posts and skeletal walls. The ground was hard but honest beneath her boots. She turned to Elias. We're not just building a house, are we? No, he said. We're building memory. Future. Something no one can torch or take. That night they all gathered around the fire. Sophia brought stew, Thomas played a fiddle someone had dragged out of storage, and even Whit cracked a smile when Elias made a dry joke about missing floorboards and wedding dates. Clara looked around the circle, the faces that had stood beside them, and felt something deep settle inside her. A knowing. This wasn't the end. It was the middle. But they'd earned it inch by inch. Heart by heart. Not from a court ruling, but from everything they chose to fight for before that day ever came. She didn't just survive the fire of her old life, she built something better from the ashes. The wind carried the scent of pine and freshly cut cedar as Clara stepped into the frame of what would soon be her new home. Sawdust clung to her skirt, and her fingers were stained with ink and charcoal from marking walls, mapping light-sketching windows that would catch the sunrise. A full month had passed since the court victory, but time on the ranch moved by its own rhythm. Slow and purposeful. No parades. No headlines. Just fence mending dirt under fingernails and something solid rising from the dust. Clara ran her hand along one of the upright beams. Elias had set this one himself. She'd watched him work in the evenings, hammering as dusk deepened and the birds quieted every swing of the hammer, steady like a man sure of the life he was building, for them both. Behind her, laughter rang from the barn. Thomas and Whit were arguing over how to rig the new pulley, their voices bouncing across the field like boys who'd never known hardship. Sophia stood at the edge of the garden plot, with her hands on her hips, barking orders to Eli, who was too busy watching a red-tailed hawk circling overhead to be useful. And still, despite the quiet joy threading through it all, Clara felt a heaviness stir in her chest. Not sorrow, something older, more reflective. A question she hadn't dared put words to even with everything won. Who was she now? Not the girl who'd boarded the train in disgrace. Not the woman who'd hidden behind perfect diction and pressed linen. But not yet someone fully rooted either. Still in between, still becoming. Still, a soft footstep behind her broke the thought. You look like you're reading the future in those walls, Elias said gently. Clara turned, smiling. Maybe I am. He stepped beside her, surveying the frame. Got word this morning rails are coming closer. New track near Red Bluff. Folks say a depot might spring up within a year. More people, more everything. She glanced at him. And is that good or bad depends on what we do with it. Clara nodded, her gaze drifting. I used to think small lives were failures. That if you weren't writing papers or giving speeches, you'd wasted your education. Wasted yourself. And now she looked back at him. Now I think building a good table, teaching a boy how to write his name, or putting up a wall that'll stand against the wind, maybe those are the things that actually last. Elias smiled. I never needed you to be small. I know. That's why I stayed. They walked together through the shell of the house. The sun filtered through the open beams, making patterns on the floor. Elias showed her where the root cellar door would go, how he planned to angle the porch, so the morning light warmed the chairs by sunrise. Every detail shaped with care. Not wealth, not extravagance, just purpose. Later that afternoon, Clara sat at the desk in the study corner of the main house, writing a letter on thick, cream-colored paper. Dear Mrs. Finch, I hope this letter finds you well. I'm writing to formally decline your offer to return to the Boston School District this fall. I'm honored you thought of me. But my life, my work, and my future are here now. I've found a place where teaching isn't bound to a classroom, where justice isn't sealed in policy, but lived in daily grit. I'm still the woman you mentored, but perhaps now I'm something more too. Thank you for giving me the start. I'll carry it forward in a different way. Clara Moore. She folded the letter carefully, sealed it with wax, and placed it in the outgoing box. There was no anger left in her for the past, just the clarity of release. As evening settled, Clara walked out to the ridge above the house where the wildflowers were blooming again, lupine paintbrush and golden yarrow. She knelt, brushing her hand along the blossoms, then paused at a small pile of stones, a cairn Elias had built the week her letter from home had come. Not a grave. Not exactly. More like a marker. He'd said, we don't have to bury what hurt us, but we can choose where to leave it. Clara took a small silver pin from her pocket, the last thing she'd brought from Boston that still held weight. She pressed it into the stones and whispered a name not aloud, but with the silent reverence of someone setting something down. The wind rose around her, not harsh, but firm, like a breath released. She stood slowly, brushing off her skirt. Then she turned back toward the house. Her house. At the porch, Sophia waited, apron dusted with flower, eyes narrowed at a pie cooling too close to the edge of the rail. Was just about to call you, she said. The boys are getting restless. Restless how Whit wants to start teaching Thomas to rope calves. Thomas wants to start with branding. I told them both they'd start with mucking stalls. Clara grinned. I think you'd make a fine judge. Sophia smirked. Only if I get to sentence them to kitchen duty. They laughed together, an easy rhythm that had taken months to build. The kind of laughter that came from shared storms and standing shoulder to shoulder when everything else leaned. As the sun dipped low, Elias lit the porch lantern. Clara stepped into its light and looked out across the landfields brushed with gold fences casting long shadows, the distant call of cattle drifting over the hills. She wasn't just surviving anymore. She was living and building and becoming. Not despite the fire, but because of it. The educational lesson learned from this story is that a good life is rarely built by running back to what feels safe, but by standing still long enough to grow roots where you are needed. It reminds us that dignity doesn't come from titles or approval, but from honest work, steady choices, and the courage to stay when things get difficult. The story also shows that love, when it is grounded in respect and shared labor, can heal old wounds without erasing who we are. In the end, a meaningful life is often made not by grand victories, but by quiet perseverance, faithful companionship, and the decision to keep building even after the fire has passed.